75% of the inquiring families who contact the adoption exchange about one of the children who are waiting do not come from the same state as the child.
We need to think of the children as our children. They're not New York's children, they're not Kentucky's children, they're not California's children, but they're our children, wherever they may be. And that all our children need and deserve a permanent home.
And foster care is meant to be a temporary safe haven for children, but it is not a permanent place to grow up. And children need the permanency of a home that is going to give them not only legal permanency, but also emotional permanency. And what that means is that a child has a place to belong and a place to call home. And also, all of us get our identity from our families. And it gives us a sense of self and a sense of where do I fit in this world? Where do I belong in this world? And every child really has a fundamental right to grow up in a family and to grow up in a permanent, loving family.
I once worked as an adoption advocate, avocation rather than vocation. And I was talking about a little boy that was in Oregon, and the couple that wanted to adopt him and it looked like they were going to be approved to adopt him was in Pennsylvania. And I was talking to the worker, and she said, "Oh, Barbara, that's just so far. That's just so far away." And I understood her because she had a vested interest in this child. She had been this child's worker for a long time, and she was worried about him going somewhere. But I had to tell her, I said, "Don't worry about him. He's going home."
Sometimes there are barriers to placing children across state lines. I'm sure we all know of some of the barriers. The first thing for me, as being the caseworker of this young man, was the thought that, okay, it is okay to let him go. It's okay to let him cross the border. When you are a caseworker and when you invest so much time in a case, you take ownership of that case, you know, right, good, bad, or indifferent. That's something that sometimes happens with caseworkers. If you have gone through and you've worked with their biological family and you've gone through and you've looked at, you know, making that decision to terminate parental rights, well, you want to make sure that the family that has that child or that young person is going to be the best family possible. And in my own mind's eye, it was the thought of, well, how can I ensure that if this person lives in another state? So the first thing I would have to say, and this is being honest, was just to look inside and really, with coaching from my supervisor, good clinical supervision, to really look through those issues of ownership that I had to make sure that, you know what, it's okay. Let me not let my own lenses stop this young person from having a forever family.
Many times you meet resistance in that they're intimidated by the amount of paperwork. They are scared that this is going to be another failed placement for this child. And not only is it going to be another failed placement, I'm going to have to go to California or New York or Florida to go get this child, to bring this child back. So there is some initial hesitancy.
When we talked with the supervisors and regional office staff and caseworkers, they had this feeling that the practice might not be as high in another jurisdiction as what they would provide for their children. So there was a certain apprehension about one another because we were from two different states, from two different bureaucracies with two different sets of guidelines.
Do we consider a family out of state, and how do we get past our own biases? I think social worker biases come into play a lot, but that we have to think about these children, and that we have to put our own fears, our own biases aside, and think about these children who need the permanency and who probably have the same fears that we do, and worry about what's going to happen.
It has to be a top-down in organizational leadership. And I don't just mean within the child welfare agency, but from the very top. But then we also have to have that supportive infrastructure. How is the agency organized? Are the ICPC and ICMA units within the program units in the offices, both at the state level and at the county level?
Regarding interstate placement, one of the most important things that can take place is continued education of the judges and judicial officers in the resources that might exist over state lines for the children in their care. Judges want children to achieve permanency just like everyone else in the system does, and if they understand the resources that might be available in either familial placements over state lines or even adoptive placements over state lines, they will help the system move forward to achieve that.
Anyone who is involved in the process of placement should have some knowledge of the interstate requirements. I think it's important for them to understand the process, understand what is required, how to fill out the forms, understand that there is a process in the receiving state when they're doing it, that they have to go through their state process as in our state.
I was so thankful for a supervisor who was willing to walk that journey with me and not to simply discount it. And that supervisor being able to walk through my concerns with me and help me see a different side of things to help me grow as a practitioner.
It's important that we be prepared to answer questions of a caseworker who may never have done an interstate adoption before, so that we can help identify resources, public and private resources, community resources, not just government resources, in the state where the family lives, as well as the state where the child lives, because it's going to take a lot of cooperation to make the adoption happen.
If you have a problem with the ICPC, call your ICPC commissioner, director in your state. They want to help. I know from talking with any number of them that they want the opportunity to move these cases appropriately and properly through the system. And while they may well be overloaded, if it is the kind of case that has been hanging out there too long, they're the people that want to get that case moving.
And it's nice to connect with the workers in the other states to give them information about how we work. So in the future, when there's future placements, they're aware of those procedures and different steps that they can take to help accommodate certain things.
It also helps to know if there are some medical assistance needs or needs medically that we haven't maybe touched on or been aware of, and so that we can also be helping the family in that way to have a successful placement and hopefully provide permanency for the child.
The agency really has to believe, the public agency does, that there is much to be gained from working collaboratively with private adoption agencies for the placement of children. And to support those relationships, we need to have a quick purchase of service or ability to contract when a placement decision is made to place a child in another state that requires services by another provider.
I really do believe that there has to be a personal touch in all of those placements. And our local agency that does most of that is responsible for providing the information and so forth in regards to the children, they feel comfortable in knowing that if they're having some difficulty, that I can contact my counterpart in the other state to make sure that the children are being cared for, or that if there are some unmet needs, that they are going to make sure and help us kind of bridge the gap for parents, adoptive parents.
And we were looking at trying to increase the cross-jurisdictional placements of children between our two states. When we first started meeting with one another, one of the first things we did was really get to know each other. And I think we began to build relationships in those meetings and to build trust. And once we began talking with each other and talking about our policies and procedures and legislation, they were different. but they were not contradictory to one another. What we'd found was that the barriers were more traditional. The way we'd always done things was more of a barrier than our legislation, because the policies and procedures and legislation were basically geared toward the same end. They were trying to find adoptive homes for children.
What made it successful was perseverance by the worker and not letting the idea of finding a good placement for these little girls go. And she just knew that if she kept looking, she could find somebody. So I would say perseverance, tenacity, and a knowledge of how to get that information.
So sometimes we get very provincial about ownership of our children. I know we do in New York State or counties, and it's loosening that up, working with other states, having, as I say, better communication, being able to quickly facilitate that process and find out about an adoptive parent in another state and make it happen. Make it happen for our kids. It's all our kids, although we have, states and territories, but it's all U.S. kids.
When an interstate placement is really what's been identified as in the best interest of, or potentially in the best interest of any particular child, then I think there's really just one important rule of thumb to keep in mind by everyone, whether it's the parents, caregivers, whether it's the social worker at the line level in either state, supervisors, administrators, interstate compact workers, judges, lawyers, all the different people with all their different roles. Really, one rule of thumb for everyone to keep in mind is to never say never, and conversely to never say always. And so what I mean by that is that each case is going to be individual, and you are going to run up against some challenges. Wherever we're crossing any of those jurisdictional lines, we will run into challenges, so we need to expect them. And then we really have to have that, what will it take to make this work? And sometimes that means exploring something we've never tried before. Sometimes it means bringing in some support or some help from someone that we haven't had to tap before. Whatever the challenge is, instead of saying, well, we can't do that, say, someone must have done this before or something similar. Where can we find out who's done it and what will it take so we can do it? If it really is what's best, there will be a way, but it's those nevers and those alwayses that tend to really create the barriers.
I think what really makes an interjurisdictional placement work is communication, communication, communication. That has to be an essential on part of all the parties involved.
Workers are looking out for the benefit of their children they have on their caseloads. They care very much about those children and feel responsible, and rightly so, want to see that those children end up in a permanent placement that's going to be very, very wonderful for the child and for the family. And so for us to be able to communicate very well a picture of the family, and I don't mean just a photograph picture, but a complete picture of who this family is, what their home is like, how well prepared they are to adopt this particular child into their home, that raises the level of trust and then breaks down some of those barriers of the distance that is between then where the child had been residing in foster care and where their new adoptive placement might be.
In doing these interstate adoptions, one of the things that we're trying to do is have a cover sheet that talks about our agency and how many interstate adoptions we've done, and the fact we understand the process, the fact of what our responsibilities are, how we're going to handle the post-placement. Also, having little bullet points of why we think this particular parent is a wonderful fit for that child. Mentioning experience with children or education at the front, so they don't have to plow through the home study in order to find it.
It really needs to start with good preparation of the adoptive family and providing them all the information on the children, and having workers and professionals even take the time to really explain to the family the children's needs and what that might look like in terms of children's behaviors, so that the family is really well prepared to receive the children and to know that that is a commitment that they're ready to make. It also takes good preparation of the children and doing good therapy work and transition work with the children to help them with their issues of grief and loss and to make sure that they're ready to make that move.
There was a child who had a sibling that already was in a permanent home, wasn't moving or leaving that home, but that family wasn't going to take this other child. So whatever happened, these two siblings, unfortunately, were going to be separated no matter what. And the family that was being now considered for the second sibling did live in another state. And so that issue of the sibling relationship was really one of the challenges that we all believed we have to keep these siblings connected. We asked the two children, what will most help you stay connected even if you don't live near each other? And they said, well, if we could text each other, and if we could have those kind of, computers where you can see each other when you talk, then we would be happy with that. And so we really looked into that, and we found a way to, again, through private donations and other sources, to get the girls each a computer with a webcam. Not very expensive, by the way, and cell phones where they could have a texting plan, and they could stay in touch and feel connected.
When Congress passed another important act, the Children's Health Act, that law created a national adoption exchange to encourage the interjurisdictional placement of children. That national adoption exchange is what is known now as AdoptUSKids.
There are families on the AdoptUSKids website who are approved to adopt, and by virtue of the fact that they're on that website, they are willing to take children who are older, who are members of sibling groups, who are children of color, and the Children's Bureau has committed to do a national advertising campaign and to fund AdoptUSKids' national photo listing website. These are resources that are available. But these resources are vastly underutilized, and it takes the staff and the states to use these resources in a serious effort to really try to find homes for children.
There's a lot of technical assistance available through the National Resource Center for Recruitment and Retention of Foster and Adoptive Parents at AdoptUSKids. And chief among those things are guides that have been developed over the last few years on various aspects of placement of children and recruitment of families. All of these guides are available at no cost on the AdoptUSKids website and are used in on-the-ground technical assistance provided free of charge to states, territories, and tribes.
I want a permanent home, not just moving around place to place.
We want to be able to feel secure somewhere. You're not going to know where you're going to be at today or tomorrow.
Because once you get bounced around so many times, you finally give up and say it's not going to happen.
For all of the roles that we play in the lives of children and families, from administrators to providers of services and so forth, the one unacceptable role in child welfare is that of a spectator. We can never sit on the bench when it comes to the life of a child and the well-being of a family.
These are our children in this country. These are not children from one state or another. These are children who need to have a family, and if the family that they need is in a different state, then we need to help them get to that family. We need to help them find a place to call home, and we need to work together to reduce barriers and to get children into homes where they belong.
The agency really needs to have an attitude that they are looking for the family that is best suited to meet the child's needs. The geographic location of that family is secondary or should not be a consideration at all.
Social workers need to put down their own biases, their own fears, and really put the kid and think of the kid's fears and see why it's so important that we do and make good matches. They do happen. They happen all the time, and they're what's best for our kids.
We have to believe in the possibility. Parents and children don't care where one another comes from. It's a cross-cultural adoption if it's across town, because it's so different than the family they came from. And so while when they look at a map, they don't see all of the barriers that we see and all of the funding streams that cause us to stop at the border. And we have to be able to see it the way they see it, see beyond that, because love doesn't know boundaries.